Rarely in history does an event come along that affects the entire world. Sure, there are big wars and big movements like World War I or the rise of Marxism, but usually you can still find relatively secluded countries that are barely affected by these events. Usually it takes something massive from nature, like a volcanic eruption that spews billions of tons of earth-cooling particulates into the air, for an event to have a truly global impact. One of the few times man-made events have had such a profound impact on the entire Western world was the Wall Street collapse of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression of the 1930s. Prior to the Great Depression and the Wall Street collapse, the United States experienced one of the most prosperous times in the nation's history. The 1920s, nicknamed the Roaring Twenties, was a time of economic success and a relaxing of social codes throughout the country. Women experienced increased liberties like finally achieving the right to vote, also known as suffrage, and the ability to express and enjoy themselves in the public sphere. This latter freedom was symbolized effectively by the flapper-style dress that you saw all over the place if you watched the recent adaptation of The Great Gatsby. Jazz music also became popular across the country, especially in speakeasies, underground bars forced to serve liquor legally and privately by the era's prohibition of alcohol. Additionally, the 1920s saw the first major boom in consumer culture. New household amenities like early refrigerators, electric lighting, and automobiles became must-have items that people were now able to take home immediately and pay for later using the expanding credit industry. The heights to which 1920s society climbed worsened the impact of the economic ruin of the following decade. Moreover, much of this prosperity was built upon the shaky legs of risky financial practices which precipitated the collapse. Indeed, many of the stores offering these new items like automobiles and refrigerators offered their own forms of credit at high interest to consumers. When consumers began failing to make payments, the businesses were forced to eat that loss. In addition, banks were lending money without safeguards against financial crises. Banks were lending out huge sums of money and using customer deposits to do so. Furthermore, they were accepting those same customer deposits without any guarantee that their money would be immediately available to them in the future. Additionally, stock market speculation played a huge role in precipitating the economic collapse. Speculation on the market by savvy financiers had artificially inflated the prices of large portions of the stock market. Moreover, much of the money being tossed around in the market was increasingly made up of the savings of the growing American middle class. This economic house of cards came tumbling down on October 28, 1929, a day which was infamously named Black Monday. Several economic indicators pointed to a possible collapse. For example, in 1926, the housing market in Florida collapsed, and land speculators in the state were ruined. In addition, banks that had loaned out too much capital were beginning to fail in 1929, and food prices were beginning to fall, ruining farmers who had produced a vast amount of food to sell at the artificially inflated prices of the 1920s. When the opening bell rang on Wall Street on October 28th, stock prices immediately began to tumble. So many stocks were sold so quickly that day that many traders were forced to work through the night to simply record all the stocks which had been traded, and by the end of the day, the Dow Jones had dropped 13%. The following day, stock prices continued to plummet, dropping another 12%. By November, the market had hit rock bottom, wiping out many middle-class investors' life savings. The ensuing panic caused even more economic ruin, as those still with deposits in savings accounts and other bank products rushed to the bank to withdraw their money. Most banks ran out of cash on hand in hours, and were forced to turn customers away, telling them their life savings had vanished in a matter of hours. Internationally, the collapse spread outward from the United States with alarming speed. The U.S. government and U.S. banks were owed huge sums of money by European countries, who had received large loans during World War I and afterward to aid the reconstruction of the war-torn continent. When the government and banks called in many of these loans soon after the collapse, the European banking system collapsed with the same rapidity that the U.S. system had collapsed. The scenes that had occurred in front of bank doors in the United States were soon played out in Madrid, London, and Paris. The economic collapse that occurred after the Wall Street market collapse of 1929 affected all sectors of the country and aspects of society. Unemployment skyrocketed nationally to approximately 25%, leaving 1 in 4 men out of work, and it rose far higher in some regions. Hoovervilles, named for President Herbert Hoover in office at the time of the collapse, sprang up across the country. These were shanty towns along the banks of rivers where families who had emerged from the collapse penniless and unemployed lived. Millions of Americans picked up what few belongings they had and traveled the country, looking for work from town to town. Though things got marginally better with the New Deal policies of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected in 1932, the country did not truly get out of the Depression until it entered World War II in 1941. The Wall Street market collapse and the Great Depression that followed was the most economically catastrophic event of the modern era. It affected the entire global economy, causing unemployment to skyrocket and forcing thousands of banks to close their doors. In the process, the life savings of many evaporated, crushing the middle class that had grew during the 1920s. Although Roosevelt's New Deal helped, it would take the economic boom spurred by the wartime production of World War II to truly lead the economic recovery.